Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Taddeo Zucchero, painter of Sant'Agnolo in Vado. Francesco Maria, being Duke of Urbino, there was born in the township of Sant'Agnolo in Vado, a place in that state, on the 1st of September in the year 1529, to the painter Ottaviano Zucchero, a male child to whom he gave the name of Taddeo, which boy, having learned by the age of 10 to read and write passing well, his father took him under his own discipline and taught him something of design. But, perceiving that his son had a very beautiful genius, and was likely to become a better master in painting than he believed himself to be, Ottaviano placed him with Pompeo de Fano, who was very much his friend, but a commonplace painter. Pompeo's works not pleasing Taddeo, and likewise his ways, he returned to Sant'Agnolo, and there, as well as in other places, assisted his father to the best of his power and knowledge. Finally, being well grown in years and in judgment, and perceiving that he could not make much progress under the discipline of his father, who was burdened with 7 sons and 1 daughter, and also that with his own little knowledge he could not be of as much assistance to his father as he might wish, he went off all alone at the age of 14 to Rome. There, at first, not being known by anyone, and himself knowing no one, he suffered some hardships, and if he did know 1 or 2 persons, he was treated worse by them than by the others. Thus, having approached Francesco, called Sant'Agnolo, who was working by the day at grotesques under Perino del Vaga, he commended himself to him with all humility, praying him that, being his kinsman, he should consent to help him, but no good came of it, for Francesco, as certain kinds of kinsmen often do, not only did not assist him by word or deed, but reproved and repelled him harshly. But for all that, not losing heart and not being dismayed, the poor boy contrived to maintain himself, or we should rather say to starve himself, for many months in Rome by grinding colors for a small price, now in one shop and now in another, at times also drawing something as best he could. And although in the end he placed himself as an assistant with one Giovan Piero Calavresi, he did not gain much profit from that, for the reason that his master, together with his wife, a shrew of a woman, not only made him grind colors all day and all night, but even, among other things, kept him in want of bread, which, lest he should be able to have enough, or to take it as his pleasure, they used to keep in a basket hung from the ceiling, with some little bells, which would ring at the least touch of a hand on the basket, and thus give the alarm. But this would have caused little annoyance to Taddeo, if only he had had any opportunity of drawing some designs by the hand of Raphael da Urbino that his pig of a master possessed. On account of these and many other strange ways, Taddeo left Giovan Piero, and resolved to live by himself and to have recourse to the workshops of Rome, where he was by that time known, spending a part of the week in doing work for a livelihood, and the rest in drawing, particularly the works by the hand of Raphael that were in the house of Agostino Chigi and in other places in Rome. And since very often, when the evening came on, he had no place wherein to sleep, many a night he took refuge under the loggie of the above-named Chigi's house, and in other such like places, which hardships did something to ruin his constitution, and if his youth had not helped him, they would have killed him altogether. As it was, falling ill, and not being assisted by his kinsman Francesco Sant'Agnolo any more than he had been before, he returned to his father's house at Sant'Agnolo in order not to finish his life in such misery as that in which he had been living. However, not to waste any more time on matters that are not of the first importance, now that I have shown at sufficient length with what difficulties and hardships he made his proficience, let me relate that Taddeo, at length restored to health, and once more in Rome, resumed his usual studies, but with more care of himself than he had taken in the past, and learned so much under a certain Jacopone that he came into some credit. Wherefore the above-mentioned Francesco, his kinsman, who had behaved so cruelly toward him, perceiving that he had become an able master, and wishing to make use of him, became reconciled with him, and they began to work together, Taddeo, who was of a kindly nature, having forgotten all his wrongs. And so, Taddeo making the designs, and both together executing many friezes in fresco, in chambers and loggie, they went on assisting one another. Meanwhile, the painter Daniele da Parma, who had formerly been many years with Antonio da Correggio, and had associated with Francesco Mazzuoli of Parma, having undertaken to paint a church in fresco for the Office of Works of Santa Maria at Vito, beyond Sora, on the borders of the Abruzzi, called Taddeo to his assistance and took him to Vito. In which work, although Daniele was not the best painter in the world, nevertheless, on account of his age, and from his having seen the methods of Correggio and Parmigiano, and with what softness they executed their paintings, he had such experience that, imparting it to Taddeo and teaching him, he was of the greatest assistance to him with his words, no less indeed than another might have been by working before him. In that work, which was on a groined vaulting, Taddeo painted the 4 evangelists, 2 sibyls, 2 prophets, and 4 not very large stories of Jesus Christ and of the Virgin his mother. He then returned to Rome, where Messer Jacopo Mattei, a Roman gentleman, discoursing with Francesco Sant'Agnolo of his desire to have the facade of his house painted in chiaroscuro, Francesco proposed Taddeo to him, but he appeared to that gentleman to be too young. Wherefore Francesco said to him that he should make trial of Taddeo in 2 scenes, which, if they were not successful, could be thrown to the ground, and if successful, could be continued. Taddeo having then set his hand to the work, the 2 first scenes proved to be such that Messer Jacopo was not only satisfied with them, but astonished. In the year 1548, therefore, when Taddeo had finished that work, he was vastly extolled by all Rome, and that with good reason, because after Polidoro, Maturino, Vincenzio da San Gimignano, and Baldassare da Siena, no one had attained in works of that kind to the standard that Taddeo had reached, who was then a young man only 18 years of age. The stories of the work may be understood from these inscriptions of the deeds of Furius Camillus, one of which is below each scene. The first then runs thus: Toscolani passe constante, vim Romanum arsent. The second, MFV signiferum secum in hostum rapit. The third, MFC octore, incensa urbs restituitur. The fourth, MFC pactionibus turbatus prelum gelus nunciat. The fifth, MFC proditorum vinctum felerio reducendum tradit. The sixth, matronalis ori collatione votum Apollini salvitur. The seventh, MFC Giannoni Reginae templum in Aventino dedicat. The eighth, Signum Junonis Reginae Aveus Romam transfertur. The ninth, MFC Anlaeus dict decem socios capit. From that time until the year 1550, when Julius III was elected Pope, Taddeo occupied himself with works of no great importance, yet with considerable profits. In which year of 1550, the year of the Jubilee, Ottaviano, the father of Taddeo, with his mother and another of their sons, went to Rome to take part in that most holy Jubilee, and partly also to see their son. After they had been there some weeks with Taddeo, on departing they left with him the boy that they had brought with them, who was called Federico, to the end that he might cause him to study letters. But Taddeo judged him to be more fitted for painting, as indeed Federico had since been seen to be from the excellent result that he has achieved. And so, after he had learned his first letters, Taddeo began to make him give his attention to design, with better fortune and support than he himself had enjoyed. Meanwhile, Taddeo painted in the church of Sant'Ambrogio de Milanese, on the wall of the high altar, 4 stories of the life of that saint, colored in fresco and not very large, with a frieze of little boys and women after the manner of terminal figures, which was a work of no little beauty. That finished, he painted a façade full of stories of Alexander the Great, besides Santa Lucia della Tinta near the Orso, beginning from his birth and continuing with 5 stories of the most noteworthy actions of that famous man, which work won him much praise, although it had to bear comparison with another façade near it by the hand of Polidoro. About that time, Guidobaldo, Duke of Urbino, having heard the fame of the young man who was his vassal, and desiring to give completion to the walls of the chapel in the Duomo of Urbino, wherein Battista Franco, as has been related, had painted the vaulting in fresco, caused Taddeo to be summoned to Urbino. And he, leaving Federico in Rome, under the care of persons who might make him give his attention to his studies, and likewise another of his brothers, whom he placed with some friends to learn the goldsmith's art, went off to Urbino, where many attentions were paid him by that duke. And then orders were given to him as to all that he was to design in the matter of the chapel and other works. But in the meantime the Duke, as general to the Signory of Venice, had to visit Verona and the other fortified places of that dominion, and he took with him Taddeo, who copied for him the picture by the hand of Raphael da Urbino, which, as has been related in another place, is in the house of the noble Counts of Canossa. And he afterwards began, also for his Excellency, a large canvas with the Conversion of St. Paul, which, unfinished as he left it, is still in the possession of his father Ottaviano at Sant'Agnolo. Then, having returned to Urbino, he occupied himself for a time with continuing the designs for the above-mentioned chapel, which were of the life of Our Lady, as may be seen from some of them that are in the possession of his brother Federico, drawn in chiaroscuro with the pen. But whether it was that the Duke had not made up his mind, or considered Taddeo to be too young, or for some other reason, Taddeo remained with him 2 years without doing anything but some pictures in a little study at Pesaro, a large coat of arms in fresco on the façade of the palace, and a picture with a life-size portrait of the Duke, which were all beautiful works. Finally, the Duke, having to depart for Rome to receive from Pope Julius III his baton as General of Holy Church, left directions that Taddeo was to proceed with the above-named chapel, and that he was to be provided with all that he required for that purpose. But the Duke's ministers, keeping him, as such men generally do, in want of everything, brought it about that Taddeo, after having lost 2 years of his time, had to go off to Rome, where, having found the Duke, he excused himself adroitly without blaming anyone, and promised that he would not fail to do the work when the time came. In the year 1551, Stefano Veltroni of Monte Sansovino, having received orders from the Pope and from Vasari to have adorned with grotesques the apartments of the villa on the hill without the Porta del Popolo, which had belonged to Cardinal Poggio, summoned Taddeo and caused him to paint in the central picture a figure of opportunity, who, having seized Fortune by the locks, appears to be about to cut them with her shears, the device of that pope, in which Taddeo acquitted himself very well. Then Vasari, having made before any of the others the designs for the court and the fountain at the foot of the new palace, which were afterwards carried on by Vignuola and Amanati, and built by Bernino, Prospero Fontana, in painting many pictures there, as will be related hereafter, availed himself not a little of Taddeo in many things. And these were the cause of even greater benefits for him, for the Pope, liking his method of working, commissioned him to paint in some apartments above the corridor of the Belvedere some little figures in color that served as friezes for those apartments, and in an open loggia, behind those that faced towards Rome, he painted in chiaroscuro on the wall, with figures as large as life, all the labors of Hercules, which were destroyed in the time of Pope Paul IV, when other apartments and a chapel were built there. At the Vigna of Pope Julius, in the first apartments of the palace, he executed some scenes in color, and in particular one of Mount Parnassus in the center of the ceilings, and in the court of the same he painted in chiaroscuro 2 scenes of the history of the Sabines, which are one on either side of the principal door of variegated marble that leads into the loggia, whence one descends to the fountain of the Aqua Vergini, all which works were much commended and extolled. Now Federico, while Taddeo was in Rome with the Duke, had returned to Urbino, and he had lived there and at Pesaro ever since. But Taddeo, after the works described above, caused him to return to Rome, in order to make use of him in executing a great frieze in a hall, with others in other rooms, of the house of the Giambeccari on the Piazza di Sant'Apostolo, and in other friezes that he painted in the house of Messer Antonio Portatore, at the obelisk of San Moro, all full of figures and other things, which were held to be very beautiful. Maestro Mattevoli, the master of the Pope, bought in the time of Pope Julius a site on the Campo Marzio, and built there a large and very commodious house, and then commissioned Taddeo to paint the façade in chiaroscuro, which Taddeo executed there 3 stories of Mercury, the messenger of the gods, which were very beautiful, and the rest he caused to be painted by others after designs by his own hand. Meanwhile, Messer Jacopo Mattei, having caused a chapel to be built in the church of the Consolazione, below the Campidoglio, allotted it to Taddeo to paint, knowing already how able he was. And he willingly undertook to do it, and for a small price, in order to show to certain persons, who went about saying that he could do nothing save façades and other works in chiaroscuro, that he could also paint in color. Having then set his hand to that work, Taddeo would only touch it when he was in the mood and vein to do well, spending the rest of his time on works that did not weigh upon him so much in the matter of honor, and so he executed it at his leisure in 4 years. On the vaulting he painted in fresco 4 scenes of the Passion of Christ, of no great size, with most beautiful fantasies, and all so well executed in invention, design, and coloring that he surpassed his own self, which scenes are the Last Supper with the Apostles, the washing of feet, the prayer in the garden, and Christ taken and kissed by Judas. On one of the walls at the sides he painted in figures large as life Christ scourged at the column, and on the other Pilate showing him after the scourging to the Jews, saying, Ecce homo. Above this last, in an arch, is the same Pilate washing his hands. And in the other arch opposite to that, Christ led before Annas. On the altar wall he painted the same Christ crucified, and the Maries at the foot of the cross, with Our Lady in a swoon. On either side of her is a prophet, and in the arch above the ornament of stucco he painted 2 Sibyls, which 4 figures are discoursing of the Passion of Christ. And on the vaulting, about certain ornaments in stucco, are 4 half-length figures representing the 4 evangelists, which are very beautiful. The whole work, which was uncovered in the year 1556, when Taddeo was not more than 26 years of age, was held, as it still is, to be extraordinary, and he was judged by the craftsmen at that time to be an excellent painter. That work finished, Messer Mario Frangipani allotted to him his chapel in the church of San Marcello, in which Taddeo made use, as he also did in many other works, of the young strangers who are always to be found in Rome, and who go about working by the day in order to learn and to gain their bread. But none the less, for the time being, he did not finish it completely. The same master painted in fresco in the Pope's palace, in the time of Paul IV, some rooms where Cardinal Carafa lived, in the great tower above the guard of halberdiers, and 2 little pictures in oils of the Nativity of Christ and the Virgin flying with Joseph into Egypt, which were sent to Portugal by the ambassador of that kingdom. The Cardinal of Mantua, wishing to have painted with the greatest possible rapidity the whole interior of his palace beside the Arco de Portogallo, allotted that work to Taddeo for a proper price, and Taddeo, beginning it with the help of a good number of men, in a short time carried it to completion, showing that he had very great judgment in being able to employ so many different brains harmoniously in so great a work, and in managing the various manners in such a way that the work appears as if all by the same hand. In short, Taddeo satisfied in that undertaking, with great profit to himself, the cardinal and all who saw it, disappointing the expectations of those who could not believe that he was likely to succeed amid the perplexities of such a great work. In like manner, he painted some scenes with figures in fresco for Messer Alessandro Mattei, in some recesses in the apartments of his palace near the Botteghi Scuri, and some others he caused to be executed by his brother Federico, to the end that he might become accustomed to the work, which Federico, having taken courage, afterwards executed by himself a Mount Parnassus in the recess of a ceiling in the house of a Roman gentleman called Stefano Margani, below the steps of the Araceli. Whereupon Taddeo, seeing Federico confident and working by himself from his own designs, without being assisted more than was reasonable by anyone, contrived to have a chapel allotted to him by the men of Santa Maria dell'Orto a Ripa, making it almost appear that he intended to do it himself, for the reason that it would never have been given to Federico alone, who was still a mere lad. Taddeo then, in order to satisfy these men, painted there the Nativity of Christ, and Federico afterwards executed all the rest, acquitting himself in such a manner that there could be seen the beginning of that excellence which is now made manifest in him. In those same times, the Duke of Guise, who was then in Rome, desiring to take an able and practised painter to paint his palace in France, Taddeo was proposed to him. Whereupon, having seen some of his works and liking his manner, he agreed to give him a salary of 600 crowns a year, on condition that Taddeo, after finishing the work that he had in hand, should go to France to serve him. And so Taddeo would have done, the money for his preparations having been deposited in a bank, if it had not been for the wars that broke out in France at that time, and shortly afterwards the death of that duke. Taddeo then went back to finish the work for Frangipani in San Marcello. But he was not able to work for long without being interrupted, for, the Emperor Charles V having died, preparations were made for giving him most honorable obsequies in Rome, fit for an emperor of the Romans, and to Taddeo were allotted many scenes from the life of that emperor, and also many trophies and other ornaments, which were made by him of pasteboard, in a very sumptuous and magnificent manner, and he finished the whole in 25 days. For his labors, therefore, and those of Federico and others who had assisted him, 600 crowns of gold were paid to him. Shortly afterwards he painted 2 great chambers at Bracciano, for Signor Paolo Giordano Orsini, which were very beautiful and richly adorned with stucco work and gold. In one the stories of Cupid and Psyche, and in the second, which had been begun previously by others, some stories of Alexander the Great, and others that remained for him to paint, continuing the history of the same Alexander, he caused to be executed by his brother Federico, who acquitted himself very well. And then he painted in fresco for Messer Stefano del Bufalo, in his garden near the Fountain of Trevi, the Muses around the Castalian Fount, and Mount Parnassus, which was held to be a beautiful work. The Wardens of Works of the Madonna of Orvieto, as has been related in the life of Simone Mosca, has caused some chapels with ornaments of marble and stucco to be built in the aisles of their church, and had also had some altar pieces executed by Girolamo Moschiano of Brescia. And having heard the fame of Taddeo by means of friends, they sent a summons to him, and he went to Orvieto, taking with him Federico. There, settling to work, he executed 2 great figures on the wall of one of those chapels, one representing the active life, and the other the contemplative, which were dispatched with a very sure facility of hand, in the manner wherein he executed works to which he gave little study. And while Taddeo was painting those figures, Federico painted 3 little stories of St. Paul in the recess of the same chapel. At the end of which, both having fallen ill, they went away, promising to return in September. Taddeo returned to Rome, and Federico to Sant'Agnolo with a slight fever, which having passed at the end of 2 months, he also returned to Rome. There, Holy Week being close at hand, the two together set to work in the Florentine company of Santa Agata, which is behind the Banchi, and painted in 4 days on the vaulting and the recess of that oratory. For a rich festival that was prepared for Holy Thursday and Good Friday, scenes in chiaroscuro of the whole Passion of Christ, with some prophets and other pictures, which caused all who saw them to marvel. After that, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, having brought very near completion his Palace of Caprarola, with Signola as architect, of whom there will be an account in a short time, gave the charge of painting it all to Taddeo, on these conditions: that since Taddeo did not wish to abandon his other works in Rome, he should be obliged to make all the cartoons, designs, divisions, and arrangements for the works in painting and in stucco that were to be executed in that place; that the men who were to carry them into execution should be chosen by Taddeo, but paid by the cardinal; and that Taddeo should be obliged to work there himself for 2 or 3 months in the year, and to go there as many times as it might be necessary to see how things were progressing, and to retouch all that was not to his satisfaction. And for all these labors the cardinal promised him a salary of 200 crowns a year. Whereupon Taddeo, having so honorable an appointment, and the support of so great a lord, determined that he would give himself some peace of mind, and would no longer accept any mean work in Rome, as he had done up to that time, desiring above all to avoid the censure that many men of art laid upon him, saying that from a certain grasping avarice he would accept any kind of work, in order to gain with the arms of others that which would have been to many of them an honest means to enable them to study, as he himself had done in his early youth. Against which reproaches Taddeo used to defend himself by saying that he did it on account of Federico and the other brothers that he had on his shoulders, desiring that they should learn with his assistance. Having thus resolved to serve Farnese, and also to finish the chapel in San Marcello, he obtained for Federico from Messer Tizio da Spoletti, the master of the household to the above-named cardinal, the commission to paint the façade of a house that he had on the Piazza della Dogana, near Sant'Eustachio, which was very welcome to Federico, for he had never desired anything so much as to have some work altogether for himself. On one part of the façade, therefore, he painted in colours the scene of Sant'Eustachio, causing himself to be baptized with his wife and children, which was a very good work; and on the centre of the façade he painted the same saint, when, while hunting, he sees Jesus Christ on the cross between the horns of a stag. Now since Federico, when he executed that work, was not more than 28 years of age, Taddeo, who reflected that the work was in a public place, and that it was of great importance to the credit of Federico, not only went sometimes to see him at his painting, but also at times insisted on retouching and improving some part. Wherefore Federico, after having had patience for a time, finally, carried away on one occasion by the anger natural in one who would have preferred to work by himself, seized a mason's hammer, and dashed to the ground something, I know not what, that Taddeo had painted. And in his rage he stayed some days without going back to the house, which being heard by the friends of both the one and the other of them, they so went to work that the two were reconciled, on the understanding that Taddeo should be able to set his hand on the designs and cartoons of Federico, and correct them at his pleasure, but never the works that he might execute in fresco, in oils, or in any other medium. Federico having then finished the work of that house, it was universally extolled, and won him the name of an able painter. After that, Taddeo was ordered to repaint in the Sala de Palafrenieri those apostles which Raphael had formerly executed there in Terretta, and which had been thrown to the ground by Paul IV. And he, having painted one, caused all the others to be executed by his brother Federico, who acquitted himself very well. Next they painted together a frieze in fresco colors in one of the halls of the Palace of the Araceli. Then, a proposal being discussed about the same time that they were working at the Araceli, to give to Signor Federico Borromeo as a wife the Lady Donna Virginia, the daughter of Duke Guidobaldo of Urbino, Taddeo was sent to take her portrait, which he did excellently well. And before he departed from Urbino, he made all the designs for a credence, which that duke afterwards caused to be made in clay at Castel Durante for sending to King Philip of Spain. Having returned to Rome, Taddeo presented to the Pope that portrait, which pleased him well enough. But such was the discourtesy of that pontiff, or of his ministers, that the poor painter was not recompensed even for his expenses. In the year 1560, the Pope expected in Rome the Lord Duke Cosimo and the Lady Duchess Leonora, his consort, and proposed to lodge their excellencies in the apartments formerly built by Innocent VIII, which look out upon the first court of the palace and that of San Pietro, and have in front of them loggie that look out on the piazza where the benediction is given. And Taddeo received the charge of painting the pictures and some friezes that were to be executed there, and of overlaying with gold the new ceilings that had been made in place of the old ones, which had been consumed by time. In that work, which was certainly a great and important undertaking, Federico, to whom his brother Taddeo gave the charge of almost the whole, acquitted himself very well. But he incurred a great danger, for as he was painting grotesques in those loggie, he fell from a staging that rested on the main part of the scaffolding, and was near coming to an evil end. No long time passed before Cardinal Emulio, to whom the Pope had given the charge of the matter, commissioned many young men, to the end that the work might be finished quickly, to paint the little palace that is in the wood of the Belvedere, which was begun in the time of Pope Paul IV, with a most beautiful fountain and many ancient statues as ornaments, after an architectural design by Piero Ligorio. The young men who worked, with great credit to themselves, in that place were Federico Barocci of Urbino, a youth of great promise, and Leonardo Congi, and Durante del Nero, both of Borgo San Sepolcro, who executed the apartments of the first floor. At the head of the staircase, which was made in a spiral shape, the first room was painted by Santi Titi, a painter of Florence, who acquitted himself very well. The larger room, which is beside the first, was painted by the above-named Federico Zuccaro, the brother of Taddeo. And the Sclavonian Giovanni del Corso, a passing good master of grotesques, executed another room beyond it. But although each of the men named above acquitted himself very well, nevertheless Federico surpassed all the others in some stories of Christ that he painted there, such as the Transfiguration, the marriage of Cana in Galilee, and the centurion kneeling before Christ. And of two that were still wanting, one was painted by Orazio Samaccini, a Bolognese painter, and the other by a certain Lorenzo Costa of Mantua. The same Federico Zuccaro painted in that place the little loggia that looks out over the fish pond. And then he painted a frieze in the principal hall of the Belvedere, to which one ascends by the spiral staircase, with stories of Moses and Pharaoh, beautiful to a marvel, the design for which work, drawn and colored with his own hand in a most beautiful drawing, Federico himself gave not long since to the Reverend Don Vincenzio Borghini, who holds it very dear as a drawing by the hand of an excellent painter. In the same place also Federico painted the angel slaying the firstborn in Egypt, availing himself, in order to finish it the quicker, of the help of many of his young men. But when those works came to be valued by certain persons, the labors of Federico and the others were not rewarded as they should have been, because there are among our craftsmen in Rome, as well as in Florence and everywhere else, some most malignant spirits, who, blinded by prejudice and envy, are not able or not willing to recognize the merits of the works of others and the deficiency of their own. And such persons are very often the reason that the young men of fine genius, becoming dismayed, grow cold in their studies and their work. After these works, Federico painted in the office of the Ruota, about an escutcheon of Pope Pius IV, 2 figures larger than life, Justice and Equity, which were much extolled, thus giving time to Taddeo, meanwhile, to attend to the work of Caprarola and the chapel in San Marcello. In the meantime, His Holiness, wishing at all costs to finish the Hall of Kings, after the many contentions that had taken place between Daniello and Salviati, as has been related, gave orders to the Bishop of Forli as to all that he wished him to do in the matter. Wherefore the bishop wrote to Vasari on the 3rd of September in the year 1561, that the Pope, wishing to finish the work of the Hall of Kings, had given him the charge of finding men who might once and for all take it off his hands, and that therefore, moved by their ancient friendship and by other reasons, he besought Giorgio to consent to go to Rome in order to execute that work, with the good pleasure and leave of his master the Duke, for the reason that, while giving satisfaction to His Holiness, he would win much honor and profit for himself, praying him to answer as soon as possible. Replying to which letter, Vasari said that, finding himself very well placed in the service of the Duke, and remunerated for his labors with rewards different from those that he had received from other pontiffs in Rome, he intended to remain in the service of His Excellency, for whom he was at that very time to set his hand to a hall much greater than the Hall of Kings, and that there was no want in Rome of men who might be employed in that work. The above-named bishop having received that answer from Vasari, and having conferred with His Holiness of the whole matter, Cardinal Emulio, immediately after receiving from the pontiff the charge of having that hall finished, divided the work, as has been related, among many young men, some of whom were already in Rome, and others were summoned from other places. To Giuseppe Porta of Castelnuovo della Garfagnana, a disciple of Salviati, were given 2 of the largest scenes in the hall. To Girolamo Cinciolante of Sormonetta, 1 of the large scenes and 1 of the small. To Orazio Samaccini of Bologna, 1 of the small scenes. To Livio da Forli, a similar one, and to Giovan Battista Fiorini of Bologna, yet another of the small scenes. Which hearing, Taddeo perceived that he had been excluded, because it had been said to the above-named Cardinal Emulio, that he was a person who gave more attention to gain than to glory and working well. And he did his utmost with Cardinal Farnese to obtain a part of that work. But the cardinal, not wishing to move in the matter, answered him that his labors at Caprarola should content him, and that it did not seem to him right that his own works should be neglected by reason of the rivalry and emulation between the craftsmen. Adding also that, when a master does well, it is the works that give a name to the place, and not the place to the works. Notwithstanding this, Taddeo so went to work by other means with Emulio, that finally he was commissioned to execute one of the smaller scenes over a door, not being able, either by prayers or by any other means, to obtain the commission for one of the large scenes. And in truth, it is said that Emilio was acting with caution in the matter, for the reason that, hoping that Giuseppe Salviati would surpass all the others, he was minded to give him the rest, and perchance to throw to the ground all that might have been done by the others. Now, after all the men named above had carried their works well forward, the Pope desired to see them all, and so, everything being uncovered, he recognized, and all the cardinals and the best craftsmen were of the same opinion, that Taddeo had acquitted himself better than any of the others, although all had done passing well. His Holiness, therefore, commanded Signor Agabrio that he should cause Cardinal Emilio to commission him to execute one of the larger scenes, whereupon the head wall was allotted to him, wherein is the door of the Pauline Chapel. And there he made a beginning with the work, but he did not carry it any farther, for the death of the Pope supervening, everything was uncovered for the holding of the conclave, although many of those scenes had not been finished. Of the scene that Taddeo began in that place, we have the design by his hand, sent to us by him, in the book of drawings that we have so often mentioned. Taddeo painted at the same time, besides some other little things, a picture with a very beautiful Christ, which was to be sent to Caprarola for Cardinal Farnese, which work is now in the possession of his brother Federico, who says that he desires it for himself as long as he lives. The picture receives its light from some weeping angels who are holding torches. But since the works that Taddeo executed at Caprarola will be described at some length in a little time, in discoursing of Vignuola, who built that fabric, for the present I shall say nothing more of them. Federico was meanwhile summoned to Venice, and made an agreement with the Patriarch Grimani to finish for him the chapel in San Francesco della Vigna, which had remained incomplete, as has been related, on account of the death of the Venetian Battista Franco. But before he began that chapel, he adorned for that patriarch the staircase of his palace in Venice, with little figures placed with much grace in certain ornaments of stucco. And then he executed in fresco in the above-named chapel the 2 stories of Lazarus and the Conversion of the Magdalene, the design of which, by the hand of Federico, is in our book. Afterwards, in the altarpiece of the same chapel, Federico painted the story of the Magi in oils, and then he painted some pictures in a loggia, which are much extolled, at the villa of Messer Giovan Battista Pellegrini, between Chioggia and Monselice, where Andrea Schiavone and the Flemings Lamberto and Gualtieri have executed many works. After the departure of Federico, Taddeo continued to work in fresco all that summer in the chapel of San Marcello, and for that chapel, finally, he painted in the altarpiece the Conversion of St. Paul. In that picture may be seen, executed in a beautiful manner, the saint fallen from his horse, and all dazed by the splendor and voice of Jesus Christ, whom he depicted amid a glory of angels, in the act, so it appears, of saying, "Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me?" His followers who are about him are likewise struck with awe, and stand as if bereft of their senses. On the vaulting, within certain ornaments of stucco, he painted in fresco 3 stories of the same saint. In one, he is being taken as a prisoner to Rome, and disembarks on the island of Malta. and there may be seen how, on the kindling of the fire, a viper strikes at his hand to bite it, while some mariners, almost naked, stand in various attitudes about the bark. In another is the scene when a young man, having fallen from a window, is brought to St. Paul, who by the power of God restores him to life. And in the third is the beheading and death of the saint. On the walls below are two large scenes, likewise in fresco. In one is St. Paul healing a man crippled in the legs, and in the other a disputation, wherein he causes a magician to be struck with blindness, and both the one and the other are truly most beautiful. But that work having been left incomplete by reason of his death, Federico has finished it this year, and it has been thrown open to view with great credit to him. At this same time, Federico executed some pictures in oils, which were sent to France by the ambassador of that kingdom. The little hall in the Farnese Palace having remained unfinished on account of the death of Salviati, wanting two scenes, namely, at the entrance, opposite to the great window, Cardinal Sant'Agnolo of the Farnese family gave them to Taddeo to execute, and he carried them to completion very well. But nevertheless he did not surpass or even equal Francesco in the works executed by him in the same apartment, as certain envious and malignant spirits went about saying throughout Rome, in order to diminish the glory of Salviati by their foul calumnies. And although Taddeo used to defend himself by saying that he had caused the whole to be executed by his assistants, and that there was nothing in that work by his hand save the design and a few other things, such excuses were not accepted, for the reason that a man who wishes to surpass another in any competition must not entrust the credit of his art to the keeping of feeble persons, for that is clearly the way to perdition. Thus Cardinal Sant'Agnolo, a man of truly supreme judgment in all things, and of surpassing goodness, recognized how much he had lost by the death of Salviati. For although he was proud and even arrogant and ill-tempered, in matters of painting he was truly most excellent. However, since the best craftsmen had disappeared from Rome, that lord, for want of others, resolved to entrust the painting of the great hall in that palace to Taddeo, who accepted it willingly, in the hope of being able to prove, by means of every effort, how great were his ability and knowledge. The Florentine Lorenzo Pucci, Cardinal Santiquattro, had formerly caused a chapel to be built in the Trinità, and all the vaulting to be painted by Perino del Vaga, with certain prophets on the outer side, and two little boys holding the arms of that cardinal. But the chapel remaining unfinished, with 3 walls still to be painted when the cardinal died, those fathers, without any regard for what was just and reasonable, sold that chapel to the Archbishop of Corfu, and it was afterwards given by that archbishop to Taddeo to paint. Now, although, out of respect for the church and from other reasons, it may have been well to find means of finishing the chapel, at least they should not have allowed the arms of the cardinal to be removed from the part that was finished, only in order to place there those of the above-named archbishop, which they could have set up in another place, instead of offering so manifest an affront to the memory of that good cardinal. Having thus so many works on his hands, Taddeo was every day urging Federico to return from Venice. That Federico, after having finished the chapel for the Patriarch, was negotiating to undertake to paint the principal wall of the great hall of the council, where Antonio Veneziano had formerly painted, but the rivalry and the contentions that he suffered from the Venetian painters were the reason that neither they, with all their interest, nor he likewise, obtained it. Meanwhile, Taddeo, having a desire to see Florence, and the many works which, so he heard, Duke Cosimo had carried out, and was still carrying out, and the beginning that his friend Giorgio Vasari was making in the great hall, Taddeo, I say, pretending one day to go to Caprarola in connection with the work that he was doing there, went off to Florence for the festival of St. John, in company with Tiberio Calgani, a young Florentine sculptor and architect. There, to say nothing of the city, he found vast pleasure in the works of the many excellent sculptors and painters, ancient as well as modern. And if he had not had so many charges and so many works on his hands, he would gladly have stayed there some months. Thus he saw the preparations of Vasari for the above-named hall, namely 44 great pictures of 4, 6, 7, or 10 braccia each, in which he was executing figures for the most part of 6 or 8 braccia, with the assistance only of the Fleming Giovanni Strada and Jacopo Zucchi, his disciples, and Battista Naldini, in all which he took the greatest pleasure, and hearing that all had been executed in less than a year, it gave him great courage. Wherefore, having returned to Rome, he set his hand to the above-named chapel in the Trinità, with the resolve that he would surpass himself in the stories of Our Lady that were to be painted there, as will be related presently. Now Federico, although he was pressed to return from Venice, was not able to refuse to stay in that city for the Carnival in company with the architect Andrea Palladio. And Andrea, having made for the gentlemen of the company of the Calza a theatre in wood after the manner of a Colosseum, in which a tragedy was to be performed, caused Federico to execute for the decoration of the same 12 large scenes, each 7 feet and a half square, with innumerable other stories of the actions of Hyrcanus, king of Jerusalem, after the subject of the tragedy, in which work Federico gained much honor, from its excellence and from the rapidity with which he executed it. Next, Palladio going to Friuli to found the Palace of Civitali, of which he had previously made the model, Federico went with him in order to see that country, and there he drew many things that pleased him. Then, after having seen many things in Verona and in many other cities of Lombardy, he finally made his way to Florence, at the very time when festive preparations, rich and marvelous, were being made for the coming of Queen Joanna of Austria. Having arrived there, he executed, after the desire of the Lord Duke, a most beautiful and fanciful hunt, in colors on a vast canvas that covered the stage at the end of the hall, and some scenes in chiaroscuro for an arch, all which gave infinite satisfaction. From Florence he went to Sant Agnolo to revisit his relatives and friends, and finally he arrived in Rome on the 16th of the January following. But he was of little assistance to Taddeo at that time, for the reason that the death of Pope Pius IV, followed by that of Cardinal Sant'Agnolo, interrupted the work of the Hall of Kings and that of the Farnese Palace. Whereupon Taddeo, who had finished another apartment of rooms at Caprarola, and had carried almost to completion the chapel in San Marcello, proceeded to give his attention to the work of the Trinità much at his leisure, and to execute the passing of Our Lady, with the apostles standing about the bier. In the meantime also Taddeo had obtained for Federico a chapel to be painted in fresco in the church of the Reformed Priests of Jesus at the obelisk of San Moro, and to that Federico straightway set his hand. Taddeo, feigning to be angry because Federico had delayed too long to return, appeared to care little for his arrival, but in truth he welcomed it greatly, as was afterwards seen from the result. For he was much annoyed by having to provide for his house, of which annoyance Federico had been accustomed to relieve him, and by the anxious care of that brother who was employed as a goldsmith. But when Federico came, they put many inconveniences to rights, in order to be able to attend to their work with a quiet mind. The friends of Taddeo were seeking meanwhile to give him a wife, but he, being one who was accustomed to living free, and feared that which generally happens, namely, that he would bring into his house, together with the wife, 1,000 vexatious cares and annoyances, could never make up his mind to it. Nay, attending to his work in the Trinità, he proceeded to make the cartoon of the principal wall, on which there was going the Ascension of Our Lady into heaven, while Federico painted a picture of St. Peter in prison for the Lord Duke of Urbino, another wherein is a Madonna in heaven with some angels about her, which was to be sent to Milan, and a third with a figure of Opportunity, which was sent to Perugia. The Cardinal of Ferrara had kept many painters and masters in stucco at work at the very beautiful villa that he has at Tivoli, and finally he sent Federico there to paint 2 rooms, one of which is dedicated to nobility and the other to glory, in which Federico acquitted himself very well, executing there beautiful and fantastic inventions. That finished, he returned to the work of the above-mentioned chapel in Rome, which he has carried to completion, painting in it a choir of many angels and various glories, with God the Father sending down the Holy Spirit upon the Madonna, who is receiving the Annunciation from the angel Gabriel, while about her are 6 prophets, larger than life and very beautiful. Taddeo, meanwhile, continuing to paint the Assumption of the Madonna in fresco in the Trinità, appeared to be driven by nature to do in that work, as his last, the utmost in his power. And in truth it proved to be his last, for having fallen ill of a sickness which at first appeared to be slight enough, and caused by the great heat that there was that year, and which afterwards became very grave, he died in the month of September in the year 1566, having first, like a good Christian, received the sacraments of the Church, and seen the greater part of his friends, and leaving in his place his brother Federico, who was also ill at that time. And so, in a short time, Buonarroti, Salviati, Daniello, and Taddeo having been taken from the world, our arts have suffered a very great loss, and particularly the art of painting. Taddeo was very bold in his work, and had a manner passing soft and pastose, and very far removed from the hardness often seen. He was very abundant in his compositions, and he made his heads, hands, and nudes very beautiful, keeping them free of the many crudities over which certain painters labor beyond all reason, in order to make it appear that they understand anatomy and art, to which kind of men there often happens that which befell him who, from his seeking to be in his speech more Athenian than the Athenians, was recognized by a woman of the people to be no Athenian. Taddeo also handled colors with much delicacy, and he had great facility of manner, for he was much assisted by nature. But at times he sought to make too much use of it. He was so desirous of having something of his own that he continued for a time to accept any sort of work for the sake of gain. But for all that he executed many, nay, innumerable works worthy of great praise. He kept a number of assistants in order to finish his works, for the reason that it is not possible to do otherwise. He was sanguine, hasty, and quick to take offense, and in addition much given to the pleasures of love. But nevertheless, although he was strongly inclined by nature to such pleasures, he contrived to conduct his affairs with a certain degree of decency and very secretly. He was loving with his friends, and whenever he could help them, he never spared himself. At his death, he left the work in the Trinità not yet uncovered, and the great hall in the Farnese Palace unfinished, and so also the works of Caprarola. But nevertheless these all remained in the hands of his brother Federico, whom the patrons of the works are content to allow to give them completion, as he will do. And in truth, Federico will be heir to the talents of Taddeo no less than to his property. Taddeo was given burial by Federico in the Ritonda of Rome, near the tabernacle where Raphael da Urbino, his fellow countryman, is buried, and certainly they are well placed, one beside the other, for the reason that even as Raphael died at the age of 37, and on the same day that he was born, which was Good Friday, so Taddeo was born on the 1st day of September 1529, and died on the 2nd day of the same month in the year 1566. Federico is minded, if it should be granted to him, to restore the other tabernacle in the Ritonda, and to make some memorial in that place to his loving brother, to whom he knows himself to be deeply indebted. Now, since mention has been made above of Jacopo Barozzi of Vignola, saying that after his architectural designs and directions, the most illustrious Cardinal Farnese has built his rich and even regal villa of Caprarola, let me relate that the same Jacopo Barozzi of Vignola, a Bolognese painter and architect, who is now 58 years of age, was placed in his childhood and youth to learn the art of painting in Bologna, but did not make much proficience, because he did not receive good guidance at the beginning. And also, to tell the truth, he had by nature much more inclination for architecture than for painting, as was clearly manifest even at that time, from his designs, and from the few works of painting that he executed, for there were always to be seen in them pieces of architecture and perspective. And so strong and potent in him was that inclination of nature, that he may be said to have learned almost by himself in a short time both the first principles and also the greatest difficulties, and that very well. Wherefore, almost before he was known, various designs with most beautiful and imaginative fantasies were seen to issue from his hand, executed for the most part at the request of Messer Francesco Guicciardini, at that time governor of Bologna, and for others of his friends, which designs were afterwards put into execution in tinted woods, inlaid after the manner of tarsia, by Fra Damiano da Bergamo, of the order of San Domenico in Bologna. Vignola then went to Rome to work at painting, and to obtain from that art the means to assist his poor family, and at first he was employed at the Belvedere with Jacopo Melegini of Ferrara, the architect of Pope Paul III, drawing some architectural designs for him. But afterwards, there being in Rome at that time an academy of most noble lords and gentlemen, who occupied themselves in reading Vitruvius, among whom were Messer Marcello Cervini, who afterwards became Pope, Monsignor Maffei, Messer Alessandro Manzuoli, and others, Vignola set himself in their service to take complete measurements of all the antiquities of Rome, and to execute certain works after their fancy, which circumstance was of the greatest assistance to him, both for learning and for profit. Meanwhile, Francesco Primaticcio, the Bolognese painter, of whom there will be an account in another place, had arrived in Rome, and he made much use of Vignola in making molds of a great part of the antiques in Rome, in order to take those molds into France, and then to cast from them statues in bronze similar to the antiques. Which work having been dispatched, Primaticcio, in going to France, took Vignola with him, in order to make use of him in matters of architecture, and to have his assistance in casting in bronze the above-mentioned statues, of which they had made the molds. Which things, both the one and the other, he did with much diligence and judgment. After 2 years had passed, he returned to Bologna, according to the promise made by him to Count Filippo Pepoli, in order to attend to the building of San Petronio. In that place he consumed several years in discussions and disputes with certain others who were his competitors in the affairs there, without doing anything but design, and cause to be constructed after his plans, the canal that brings vessels into Bologna, whereas before that they could not come within 3 miles, than which work none better or more useful was ever executed. Although Vignola, the originator of an enterprise so useful and so praiseworthy, was poorly rewarded for it. Pope Julius III, having been elected in the year 1550, by means of Vasari, Vignola was appointed architect to His Holiness, and there was given to him the particular charge of conducting the Aqua Vergini, and of superintending the works at the Vigna of Pope Julius, who took Vignola into his service most willingly, because he had come to know him when he was legate in Bologna. In that building, and in other works that he executed for that pontiff, he endured much labor, but was badly rewarded for it. Finally, Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, having recognized the genius of Vignola, to whom he always showed much favor, desired, in carrying out the building of his palace at Caprarola, that the whole work should spring from the fanciful design and invention of Vignola. And in truth, the judgment of that lord in making choice of so excellent an architect was no less than the greatness of his mind in setting his hand to an edifice so noble and grand, which, although it is in a place where it can be enjoyed but little by men in general, being out of the way, yet is none the less marvelous in its sight, and very suitable for one who wishes at times to withdraw from the vexations and tumult of the city. This edifice, then, has the form of a pentagon, and is divided into 4 sets of apartments, without counting the front part, where the principal door is, in which front part is a loggia, 40 palms in breadth and 80 in length. On one side there curves in a round form a spiral staircase, 10 palms wide across the steps, and 20 palms across the space in the center, which gives light to the staircase, which curves from the base to the third or uppermost story, and these steps are all supported by double columns with cornices, which curve in a round in accordance with the staircase. The whole is a rich and well-varied work, beginning with the Doric order and continuing in the Ionic, the Corinthian, and the Composite, with a wealth of balusters, niches, and other fanciful ornaments, which make it a rare thing and most beautiful. Opposite to this staircase, namely at the other of the corners that are one on either side of the above-mentioned loggia of the entrance, there is a suite of rooms that begin in a circular vestibule equal in breadth to the staircase, and leads to a great hall on the ground floor, 80 palms long and 40 broad. This hall is wrought in stucco and painted with stories of Jove, namely his birth, his being nursed by the goat Amalthea, and her coronation, with 2 other stories on either side of the last named, showing her being placed in the heavens among the 48 heavenly signs, and another similar story of the same goat, which alludes, as also do the others, to the name of Caprarola. On the walls of this hall are perspective views of buildings drawn by Vignuola and colored by his son-in-law, which are very beautiful and make the room seem larger than it is. Beside this hall is a smaller hall of 40 palms, which comes exactly at the next corner, and in it, besides the works in stucco, are painted things that are all significant of spring. Continuing from this little hall towards the other angle, that is, towards the point of the pentagon, where a tower has been begun, one goes into 3 chambers, each 40 palms broad and 30 long. In the first of these are various inventions executed in stucco and painting, representing summer, to which season this first chamber is dedicated. In that which follows there is painted and wrought in the same manner the season of autumn, and in the last, which is sheltered from the north and decorated likewise in the same manner, there is represented in a similar kind of work the season of winter. So far we have spoken, with regard to the floor that is over the underground rooms of the basement, cut out of the tufa, where there are rooms for the servants, kitchens, larders, and wine cellars, of the half of this pentagonal edifice, namely, of the part on the right hand. Opposite to that part on the left hand, there are rooms exactly equal in number and of the same size. Within the 5 angles of the pentagon, Vignuola has made a circular court, into which all the apartments of the edifice open with their doors, which doors, I mean, all open into the circular loggia surrounding the court, which is 18 palms in breadth, while the diameter of the remaining space in the court is 95 palms and 5 inches. The pilasters of the loggia, which is divided up by niches, supporting the arches and the vaulting, are in couples, with a niche in the center, and 20 in number, and each couple covers a breadth of 15 palms, which is also the breadth of the space of the arches. Around the loggia, at the angles that form the shape of the round, are 4 spiral staircases, which lead from the basement of the palace up to the top, for the convenience of the edifice and of the rooms. And there are reservoirs that collect the rain water, which feed a very large and beautiful cistern in the center, to say nothing of the windows and innumerable other conveniences, which make this building appear to be, as indeed it is, a rare and most beautiful fabric. And, besides having the site and form of a fortress, it is furnished on the outer side with an oval flight of steps, with ditches all around, and with drawbridges made with beautiful invention and in a novel manner, which lead into gardens full of rich and well varied fountains, graceful parterres of verdure, and in short, all that is required for a truly regal villa. Now, ascending by the great spiral staircase from the level of the court to the other apartment above, one finds already finished, over the part of which we have spoken, an equal number of rooms, and also the chapel, which is opposite to the principal round staircase on this floor. In the hall that is exactly above that of Jove, and of equal size, there are painted by the hands of Taddeo and his young men, with very rich and beautiful ornaments of stucco, the actions of the illustrious men of the house of Farnese. On the vaulting are compartments with 6 scenes, 4 square and 2 round, which follow right round the cornice of this hall, and in the center are 3 ovals accompanied along their length by 2 smaller and rectangular pictures, in one of which is painted Fame, and in the other Bellona. In the first of the 3 ovals is Peace. In the central oval the ancient arms of the house of Farnese, with the helmet crest, above which is the unicorn, and in the last is Religion. In the first of the 6 above-mentioned scenes, which is a round, is Guido Farnese, with many persons, all well executed about him, and with this inscription below: Guido Farnesius, urbis veteris principatum civibus, ipsis deferentibus adeptus, laboranti intestinus, discordius civitati, seditiosa factione ejecta, passum et tranquillitatem restituit, anno 1323. In an oblong picture is Pietro Niccolo Farnese, who is delivering Bologna, with this inscription below: Petrus Nicolaeus, sedis Romanae potentissimus, hostibus memorabili, prelio superatis, Eminenti obsidionis, periculo bonanium liberat, annum salutis 1361. In the rectangular picture next to this is Pietro Farnese, elected captain of the Florentines, with this inscription: Petrus Farnesius, Reap Florentinae imperator, magnis Pisanorum copis, urbem Florentiam, triumphans ingreditor, anno 1362. In the other round picture, which is opposite to that described above, is another Pietro Farnese, who routs the enemies of the Roman Church at Orbatello with his inscription. In one of the 2 other rectangular pictures, which are of equal size, is Signor Ranieri Farnese, elected general of the Florentines, in place of the above-named Signor Pietro, his brother, with this inscription: Rainerius Farnesius, a Florentinis difficili, riep tempore in petri frateris, mortui locum copiarum omnium dox diligitur, anno 1362. In the last picture is Ranuccio Farnese, chosen by Eugenius III as general of the church, with this inscription: Ranutius Farnesius, Pauli tertii papae avos, Eugenio tertio PM, Rose aureae munere insignitas, pontificiae exercitas imperator constituitur, anno Christi 1435. In short, there are on this vaulting vast numbers of most beautiful figures, besides the stucco work and other ornaments overlaid with gold. On the walls are 8 scenes, 2 to each wall. On the first, in a scene on the right hand as one enters, is Pope Julius III confirming Duke Ottavio and the prince his son in the possession of Parma and Piacenza, in the presence of Cardinal Farnese, Sant'Agnolo his brother, the Carmalingo Santafiori, the elder Salviati, Chieti, Carpi, Polo, and Moroni, all being portraits from life, with this inscription: Julius III, P.M. Alexandro Farnesio Auctore, Octavio Farnesio, ejus fratri, Parmam amissam restituit, anno salutis 1550. In the second scene is Cardinal Farnese going to Worms as legate to the Emperor Charles V, and His Majesty and the Prince his son are coming forth to meet him, with a vast multitude of barons, and among them the King of the Romans, with the proper inscription. On the wall on the left hand as one enters, in the first scene, is the war fought against the Lutherans in Germany, where Duke Ottavio Farnese was legate in the year 1546, with the inscription. And in the second are the above-named Cardinal Farnese and the Emperor with his sons, who are all four under a baldachin carried by various persons portrayed from life, among whom is Taddeo, the master of the work, with a company of many lords all around. On one of the head walls, or rather ends, are two scenes, and between them an oval, in which is the portrait of King Philip, with this inscription: Philippo Hispaniarum, Regi Maximo, ob eximia in domum Farnesium merita. In one of the scenes is Duke Ottavio taking Madama Margherita of Austria as his wife, with Pope Paul III in the center, and portraits of Cardinal Farnese the Younger, the Cardinal of Carpi, Duke Pier Luigi, Messer Durante, Euralio da Singoli, Messer Giovanni Riccio of Montepulciano, the Bishop of Como, Signora Livia Colonna, Claudia Mancina, Settimia, and Donna Maria de Mendoza. In the other is Duke Orazio taking as his wife the daughter of King Henry of France, with this inscription: Henricus II, Valesius, Gallorem Rex, Horatio Farnesio, Castri Duci, Dianam filium in matrimonium collacat, anno salutis 1552. In which scene, besides the portrait of Diana herself with the royal mantle and that of her husband Duke Orazio, are portraits of Caterina de' Medici, Queen of France, Marguerite, the sister of the King of Navarre, the Constable, the Duke of Guise, the Duke of Nemours, the Admiral, Prince of Condé, the younger Cardinal of Lorraine, Guise not yet a cardinal, Signor Piero Strozzi, Madame de Montpensier, and Mademoiselle de Rohan. On the other head wall, opposite to that already described, are likewise two other scenes, with the oval in the center, in which is the portrait of King Henry of France, with this inscription: Henrico Francorum Regi Max, Familiae Farnesiae Conservatori. In one of the scenes, namely in that which is on the right hand, Pope Paul III is investing Duke Orazio, who is kneeling, with a priestly robe, and making him prefect of Rome, with Duke Pier Luigi close at hand, and other lords around, and with these words: Paulus III, P.M., Horatium Farnesium nepotum, Somme spei adolescentem, Prefectum urbis creat anno Sal. 1549. And in this scene are portraits of the Cardinal of Paris, Visio, Morone, Badia, Trento, Sfondrato, and Ardinghelli. In the other scene, beside the last named, the same Pope is giving the general's baton to Pier Luigi and his sons, who were not yet cardinals, with portraits of the Pope, Pier Luigi Farnese, the Camerlengo, Duke Ottavio, Orazio, the Cardinal of Capua, Simonetta, Jacobaccio, San Jacopo, Ferrara, Signor Ranuccio Farnese as a young man, Giovio, Molza, Marcello Cervini, who afterwards became Pope, the Marquis of Marignano, Signor Giovan Battista Castaldo, Signor Alessandro Vitelli, and Signor Giovan Battista Savelli. Coming now to the little hall which is beside the hall just described, and which is above the Hall of Spring in the vaulting, which is adorned with a vast and rich decoration in stucco and gold. In the recess in the center there is the coronation of Pope Paul III, with 4 spaces that form a cruciform inscription with these words: Paulus III Farnesius, Pontifex Maximus, Deo et hominibus, approbantibus, sacra tiara solemni, ritu coronatur. Anno Salutis 1534, 3rd non November. Then follow 4 scenes above the cornice, namely, 1 over every wall. In the first, the Pope is blessing the galleys at Civita Vecchia, when about to send them to Tunis in Barbary in the year 1535. In the next, the same Pope is excommunicating the King of England in the year 1537 with the proper inscription. In the third is a fleet of galleys which the Emperor and the Venetians fitted out against the Turk, with the authority and assistance of the Pontiff in the year 1538. In the fourth, Perugia having rebelled against the Church, the people of that city go to seek pardon in the year 1540. On the walls of the same little hall are 4 large scenes, 1 to each wall, with windows and doors between. In the first large scene, the Emperor Charles V, having returned victorious from Tunis, is kissing the feet of Pope Paul, of the Farnese family, in Rome in the year 1535. In the next, which is above the door on the left hand, is the story of the peace that Pope Paul III brought about at Busseto, between the Emperor Charles V and Francis I of France in the year 1538, in which scene are these portraits: the elder Bourbon, King Francis, King Henry, the elder Lorenzo, Tournon, the younger Lorenzo, the younger Bourbon, and 2 sons of King Francis. In the third, the same Pope is making Cardinal de Monte his legate at the Council of Trent, and there are innumerable portraits. In the last, which is between 2 windows, the same Pontiff is creating many cardinals in preparation for the council, among whom there are 4 who became popes in succession after him: Julius III, Marcello Cervini, Paul IV, and Pius IV. To put it briefly, this little hall is very richly adorned with all that is required in such a place. In the first chamber, next to the little hall, which is dedicated to dress, and likewise richly wrought in stucco and gold, there is in the center a sacrifice, with 3 nude figures, among which is an armed figure of Alexander the Great, who is casting some garments of skin upon the fire. And in many other scenes that are in the same place, one sees how men discovered the way to make garments from plants and other wild products. But it would take too long to seek to describe the whole in full. From this chamber one enters into a second, dedicated to sleep, for which, When Taddeo had to paint it, he received the inventions given below from the Commendatore Annibale Caro at the commission of the Cardinal, and to the end that the whole may be the better understood, we shall write here the advice of Caro in his own words, which are these. The subjects that the Cardinal has commanded me to give you for the pictures in the Palace of Caprarola, it is not enough for them to be explained by word of mouth, because, besides the invention, we must look to the disposition of the figures, the attitudes, the colors, and a number of other considerations, all in accordance with the descriptions that I find of the things that appear to me to be suitable. Wherefore, I shall put down on paper all that occurs to me in the matter, as briefly and as distinctly as I shall be able. And first, with regard to the chamber with the flat vaulting, for of any other up to the present he has not given me the charge, it appears to me that since it is destined to contain the bed for the person of his most illustrious lordship, there must be executed there things in keeping with the place and out of the common both in the invention and in the workmanship. Now, to declare my conception first in general, I would have a knight painted there, because, besides that it would be appropriate to sleep, it would be a subject not very customary and different from those of the other rooms, and would give you an occasion of executing rare and beautiful works in your art, since the strong lights and dark shadows that go into such a subject are wont to give no little grace and relief to the figures, and it would please me to have the time of this night close upon the dawn, to the end that the things represented there may be visible without improbability. And to come to the details and to their disposition, it is necessary that we come to an understanding first about the situation and the distribution of the chamber. Let us say then that it is divided, as indeed it is, into vaulting and walls, or facades as we wish to call them. The vaulting has a sunk oval in the center and 4 great spandrels at the corners, which, drawing together little by little, and continuing one with the other along the facades, embrace the above-mentioned oval. The walls also are 4, and between the spandrels they form 4 lunettes. Now let us give names to all these parts, with the divisions that we shall make in the whole chamber, and we shall thus be able to distinguish each part on every side all the way round. Dividing it into 5 sections then, the first shall be the head, and this I presume to be next to the garden. The second, which must be that opposite to the first, we shall call the foot. The third, on the right hand, we shall call the right. The fourth, on the left hand, the left. And the fifth, situated in the midst of the others, shall be named the center. Thus, distinguishing all the parts with these names, we shall speak, for example, of the lunette at the head, the facade at the foot, the concavity on the left, the horn on the right, and so with any other part that it may be necessary to name. And to the spandrels that are at the corners, each between 2 of these boundaries, we shall give the name both of the one and of the other. And thus also we shall determine on the pavement below the situation of the bed, which in my opinion must be along the facade at the foot, with the head turned to the left-hand facade. Now, all the parts having received a name, let us turn to give a form to them all in general, and then to each by itself. First of all, the concavity of the vaulting, or rather the oval, shall be represented, so the cardinal has judiciously determined, as being all heaven. The rest of the vaulting, comprising the 4 spandrels together with the border that we have already mentioned as enclosing the oval all around, shall be made to appear as the unbroken surface within the chamber, and as resting upon the facades, with some beautiful architectural design of your own devising. The 4 lunettes I would have counterfeited as likewise concave, and whereas the oval above represents a heaven, these must represent heaven, earth, and sea, as if without the chamber, in accordance with the various figures and scenes that shall be there. And since the vaulting being very flat, the lunettes are so low that they will not hold any but little figures, I would divide each lunette into 3 parts along its length, and leaving the ends in a line with the height of the spandrels, I would deepen the center part below that line, in such a manner that it may be like a great high window, and show the exterior of the room, as it were, with figures and scenes proportionate in size to the others. And the 2 extremities that remain on either side, like horns to the lunette, and horns henceforward they will be called, shall be left low of the height that they are above that line, and in each of them must be painted a figure seated or recumbent, and seeming to be either within or without the room, whichever you please, for you must choose what looks best. And what I say of 1 lunette, I say of all 4. To return to the interior of the chamber as a whole, it appears to me that it should be in itself all in darkness, save in so far as the concavities both of the oval above and of the large windows at the sides may give it a certain degree of light, partly from the heaven with its celestial lights, and partly from the earth with fires that must be painted there, as will be described later. At the same time, from the center of the room to the lower end, I would have it that the nearer one may approach to the foot where the night is to be, the greater shall be the darkness, and that in like manner in the other half, from the center to the upper end, in proportion as one approaches step by step to the head, where aurora is to be, it shall grow continually lighter. Having thus disposed of the chamber as a whole, let us proceed to distribute the subjects, giving to each part its own. In the oval that is in the vaulting, you must paint at the head, as we have said, a figure of aurora. This figure, I find, may be made in several ways, but of all these I shall choose that which, in my opinion, can be done with the greatest grace in painting. You must paint, then, a maiden of such beauty as the poets strive to express with words, composing her of roses, gold, purple, dew, and other such like graces, and so much for the colors and flesh tints of her person. As for her dress, composing out of many one that appears most suitable, we must reflect that, even as she has 3 stages and 3 distinct colors, so she has 3 names, alba, vermiglia, and rancea. And for this reason I would make her down to the girdle a garment delicate in texture, as it were transparent, and white. From the girdle down to the knees, an outer garment of scarlet, with certain pinkings and tassels in imitation of the reflections seen on the clouds when she is vermilion, and from the knees down to the feet of the color of gold, in order to represent her when she is orange, taking heed that this dress must be slit from the thighs downwards in order to show the bare legs. And both the undergarment and the outer must be blown by the wind so as to flutter in folds. The arms also must be naked and of a rosy flesh tint. On the shoulders you must make her wings of various colors, and on the head a crown of roses. And in her hands you must place a lamp or a lighted torch, or rather there must go before her a Cupid who is carrying a torch, and after her another, who with another torch awakens Tithonus. She must be seated on a gilded throne in a chariot likewise gilded, drawn by a winged Pegasus or by 2 horses, for she is depicted both in the one way and in the other. As for the colors of the horses, one must be shining white, and the other shining red, in order to denote them according to the names that Homer gives them of Lampus and Phaethon. You must make her rising from a tranquil sea, which should appear rippled, luminous, and glancing. On the wall behind, upon the right-hand horn, you must paint her husband Tithonus, and on the left her lover Cephalus. Tithonus should be an old man, white as snow, on an orange-colored bed, or rather in a cradle, according to those who make him, on account of his great age, once more a child, and he should be shown in the act of holding her back, or gazing on her with amorous eyes, or sighing after her, as if her departure grieved him. Cephalus must be a most beautiful young man, dressed in a doublet girt at the waist, with his buskins on his feet, with the spear, which must have the iron head gilded, in his hand, and with a dog at his side, in the act of entering into a wood, as if caring nothing for her by reason of the love that he bears to his Procris. Between Cephalus and Tithonus, in the space with the great window, behind the aurora, there must shoot upwards some few rays of the sun, of a splendor more vivid than that of the aurora. But these must be cut off so as not to be seen by a large figure of a woman who must appear before them. This woman shall be Vigilance, and she must be so painted that it may appear that she is illumined from behind by the rising sun, and that, in order to forestall him, she is entering into the chamber by the great window that has been mentioned. Let her form be that of a tall, valorous, and splendid woman, with the eyes well open and the brows well arched, dressed down to the feet in a transparent veil, which is girt at the waist, leaning with one hand on a lance, and with the other gathering together a fold of her gown. Let her stand firmly on the right foot, and holding the left foot suspended, appear from one side to be rooted to the ground, and from the other to be ready to step out. Let her raise her head in order to gaze at Aurora, and appear to be angry that she has risen before her, and let her have on the head a helmet with a cock upon it, which shall be in the act of beating its wings and crowing. All this must be behind the aurora, and in front of her, in the heaven of the concave oval, I would make certain little figures of girls, one behind another, some more bright and some less bright, according as they are more or less near to the light of the aurora, in order to represent the hours which go before her and the sun. These hours shall be painted with the vestments, garlands, and headdresses of virgins, and winged, with the hands full of flowers, as if they were scattering these about. On the opposite side, at the foot of the oval, there shall be night, and even as Aurora is rising, night shall be sinking. As the one shows her front, the other shall turn her back. As the first is issuing from a tranquil sea, the second shall be plunging into a sea that is troubled and dark. The horses of the first come with the breast forward, those of the second shall show their croups. And so also the person of night shall be altogether different from that of Aurora. Her flesh tint shall be dark, dark her mantle, dark her hair, and dark her wings, and these shall be open as if she were flying. She shall hold her hands on high, and in one a white babe that is sleeping, to represent sleep, and in the other a black babe that appears to be sleeping, to represent death, for of both these she is said to be the mother. She shall appear to be sinking, with the head downwards, and wrapped in thicker shadow, and the heaven above her shall be of a deeper blue, and dotted with many stars. Her car shall be of bronze, with the wheels divided into 4 spaces to denote her 4 watches. Then on the facade opposite, namely at the foot, even as Aurora has on either side Tithonus and Cephalus, Night shall have Oceanus and Atlas. Oceanus shall be painted on the right, a great figure of a man, with the beard and hair dripping and dishevelled. And both from the beard and from the hair there shall issue here and there some heads of dolphins. He shall be depicted as resting on a car drawn by whales, with the Tritons all around in front of him, with their trumpets, and also the nymphs, and behind him some beasts of the sea, or if not with all these things, at least with some of them, according to the space that you will have, which to me appears little for so much matter. For Atlas on the left hand there shall be painted a mountain, with the breasts, arms, and all the upper parts of a robust man, bearded and muscular, in the act of upholding the heavens, as his figure is generally shown. Lower down, likewise, over against the vigilance that we have placed opposite to Aurora, there should be placed a figure of Sleep. But since it appears to me better, for several reasons, that Sleep should be over the bed, we must place in his stead a figure of Repose. As for this Repose, I find indeed that she was worshipped, and that temples were dedicated to her, but I can by no means find how she was figured, unless her figure was that of Security, which I do not believe, because security is a thing of the mind, and repose of the body. We must therefore figure a repose of our own devising in this manner: a young maiden of pleasing aspect, who, being weary, yet does not lie down, but sleeps seated with the head resting on the left arm. She shall have a spear, with the head lying against her shoulder, and the foot fixed in the ground, and shall let one arm hang limply down it, and have one leg crossed over it in the attitude of resting, for the restoration of her strength, and not from indolence. She shall have a crown of poppies, and a scepter laid on one side, but not so far distant that she cannot readily take it up again. And whereas Vigilance has upon her head a cock crowing, so to her we may give a sitting hen, in order to signify that even when resting she is active. Within the same oval on the right hand you shall paint a moon. Her figure shall be that of a maiden of about 18 years, tall and virginal in aspect, after the likeness of Apollo, with long tresses, thick and somewhat waved, or wearing on the head one of those caps that are called Phrygian, wide at the foot, and pointed and twisted at the top, like the Doge's hat, with 2 wings over the brow that must hang down and cover the ears, and with 2 little horns jutting from the head, as of the crescent moon. Or after Apuleius, with a flat disk, polished and shining in the manner of a mirror, on the center of the brow, which must have on either side of it some serpents, and over it some few ears of corn, and on the head a crown of dittany after the Greeks, or of various flowers after Marcian, or of helichrysum after certain others. Her dress some would have reaching down to the feet, others only to the knees, girt under the breasts, and crossed below the navel after the fashion of a nymph, with a little mantle on the shoulder, clasped over the muscle on the right side, and on the feet buskins wrought in a pleasing pattern. Pausanias, alluding, I believe, to Diana, makes her dressed in deerskin. Apuleius, taking her perchance for Isis, gives her a vestment of the finest veiling in various colors, white, yellow, and red, and another garment all black, but bright and shining, dotted with many stars, and with a moon in the center. and all around it a border with ornaments of fruits and flowers hanging down after the manner of tassels. Of these vestments take whichever looks best. The arms you must make bare, with the sleeves broad. With the right hand she must hold a lighted torch, and with the left an unbent bow, which, according to Claudian, is of horn, and, according to Ovid, of gold. Make it as seems best to you, and attach the quiver to her shoulders. She is found in Pausanias with 2 serpents in the left hand, and in Apuleius she has a gilded vase with a serpent as a handle, which appears as if swollen with poison, the foot of the vase being adorned with palm leaves. But by this I believe that he means to indicate Isis, and I have therefore resolved that you shall represent her with the bow as described above. She shall ride on a car drawn by horses, one black and the other white, or, if you desire variety, by a mule, after Festus Pompeius, or by bullocks, after Claudian and Ausonius. And if you choose bullocks, they must have the horns very small, and a white patch on the right flank. The attitude of the moon must be that of looking down from the heaven in the oval towards the horn of the façade that looks out over the garden, where you must place her lover Endymion, and she shall lean down from the car to kiss him, and, not being able by reason of the interposition of the border, she shall gaze lovingly upon him, and illumine him with her radiance. For Endymion you must make a beautiful young shepherd asleep at the foot of Mount Latmus. In the horn on the other side there shall be Pan, the god of shepherds, who was enamored of the moon. His figure is very well known. Round his neck place his pipes, and with both hands he shall hold out towards the moon a skein of white wool, with which he is fabled to have won her love. And with that present he must appear to be persuading her to come down to live with him. In the rest of the space of the same great window you must paint a scene, and that shall be the scene of the sacrifices to the Lemurs, which men used to hold at night in order to drive evil spirits from their houses. The ritual of these sacrifices was to go about with the hands washed and the feet bare, scattering black beans, first rolling them about in the mouth, and then throwing them over the shoulder. And among the company were some who made a noise by sounding basins and such like instruments of copper. On the left side of the oval you must paint Mercury in the ordinary manner, with the little winged cap, with the winged sandals on the feet, with the caduceus in the left hand, and with the purse in the right, altogether nude, save for his little mantle on the shoulder. A most beautiful youth, but with a natural beauty, without any artifice, of a cheerful countenance, spirited eyes, beardless, or with the first down, with reddish hair, and narrow in the shoulders. Some place wings over his ears, and make certain golden feathers coming out of his hair. The attitude you may make as you please, provided only that it shows him gliding down from heaven in order to infuse sleep, and turning towards the side of the bed, about to touch the tester with his wand. On the left-hand façade, in the horn next to the façade at the foot, we might have the Lares, his 2 sons, who were the tutelary spirits of private houses, namely, 2 young men dressed in the skins of dogs, with certain garments girt up and thrown over the left shoulder in such a way that they may come out under the right, in order to signify that they are unencumbered and ready to guard the house. They shall sit one beside the other, each holding a spear in the right hand, and between them in the center there shall be a dog, and above them a small head of Vulcan, wearing a little cap, with a smith's pincers beside it. In the other horn, next to the façade at the head, you must paint a Battus, being converted into stone, for having revealed the cattle stolen by Mercury. Let him be an old shepherd seated, showing with the forefinger of the right arm the place where the cattle were hidden, and leaning with the left arm on a stick or rod, the herdsman's staff. And from the waist downwards he must be of black stone, of the color of basanite, into which stone he was converted. Then in the rest of the great window you must paint the scene of the sacrifice that the ancients used to offer to Mercury to the end that their sleep might not be interrupted. And to represent this, it is necessary to make an altar with his statue upon it. At the foot of that, a fire, and all around, persons who are throwing into it pieces of wood for burning, and who, having in their hands cups full of wine, are sprinkling part of the wine and drinking the rest. In the center of the oval, in order to fill up all the space of the heaven, I would paint twilight, as being the mean between aurora and night. To represent him, I find that one must paint a young man wholly naked, sometimes with wings and sometimes without, and with 2 lighted torches, one of which we must show being kindled at that of aurora, and the other held out towards night. Some represent this young man with the same 2 torches as riding on one of the horses of the sun or of aurora, but this would not be a composition suitable for our purpose. Wherefore we shall make him as described above, turned towards night, and place behind him, between his legs, a great star, which shall be that of Venus, because Venus, Phosphorus, Hesperus, and twilight seem to be regarded as one and the same thing. And, with the exception of this star, see to it that all the lesser stars near the aurora shall have disappeared. Now, having by this time filled up all the exterior of the chamber, both above in the oval and on the sides and façades, it remains for us to come to the interior, the 4 spandrels of the vaulting. Beginning with that over the bed, which is between the left-hand façade and that at the foot, you must paint Sleep there, and in order to figure him, you must first figure his home. Ovid places it in Lemnos and among the Cimmeriae, Homer in the Aegean Sea, Statius among the Ethiopians, and Ariosto in Arabia. Wherever it may be, it is enough to depict a mountain, such a one as may be imagined where there is always darkness and never any sun. At the foot of it a deep hollow, through which water shall pass, as still as death, in order to signify that it makes no murmur. And this water must be of a sombre hue, because they make it a branch of Lethe. Within this hollow shall be a bed, which, being fabled to be of ebony, shall be black in color, and covered with black draperies. In this bed shall be placed Sleep, a young man of perfect beauty, for they make him surpassing beautiful and serene, nude according to some, and according to others clothed in 2 garments, one black below and another white over it, with wings on the shoulders, and, according to Statius, also at the top of the head. Under his arm he shall hold a horn, which shall appear to be spilling a liquid of a livid hue over the bed, in order to denote oblivion, although others make the horn full of fruits. In one hand he shall hold the wand, and in the other 3 poppy heads. He shall be sleeping like one sick, with the head and the limbs hanging limp, as if wholly relaxed in slumber. About his head shall be seen Morpheus, Icelus, and Phantasus, and a great number of dreams, all which are his children. The dreams shall be little figures, some of a beautiful aspect, and others hideous, as being things that partly please and partly terrify. Let them likewise have wings, and also twisted feet, as being unstable and uncertain things, and let them hover and whirl about him, making a kind of dramatic spectacle, by transforming themselves into things possible and impossible. Morpheus is called by Ovid the creator and fashioner of figures, and I would therefore make him in the act of fashioning various masks, with grotesque faces, and placing some of them on feet. Isolus, they say, transforms himself into many shapes, and him I would figure in such a way that, as a whole, he may have the appearance of a man, and yet may have parts of a wild beast, of a bird, and of a serpent, as the same Ovid describes him. Phantasus, they have it, transforms himself into various inanimate things, and him also we may represent, after the words of Ovid, partly of stone, partly of water, and partly of wood. You must feign that in this place there are 2 gates, one of ivory, whence there issue the false dreams, and one of horn, whence the true dreams come. The true shall be more distinct in color, more luminous, and better executed, and the false shall be confused, somber, and imperfect. In the next spandrel, between the façade at the foot and that on the right hand, you shall place Brizo, the goddess of prophecy and the interpretress of dreams. For her I cannot find the vestments, but I would make her in the manner of a Sibyl, seated at the foot of the elm described by Virgil, under the branches of which are placed innumerable images, which, falling from those branches, must be shown flying about her, in the forms that we have given them, as has been related, some lighter and some darker, some broken and some indistinct, and others almost wholly invisible, in order to represent by these the dreams, the visions, the oracles, the phantasms, and the vain things that are seen in sleep. For into these 5 kinds Macrobius appears to divide them. And she shall be, as it were, lost in thought, interpreting them, and shall have about her persons offering to her baskets filled with all manner of things, excepting only fishes. In the spandrel between the right-hand façade and that at the head, it will be well to place Harpocrates, the god of silence, because this, presenting itself at the first glance before those who enter by the door that leads from the great painted chamber, will warn them as they enter that they must not make any noise. His figure is that of a young man, or rather of a boy, black in color, from his being god of the Egyptians, and with his finger to his mouth in the act of commanding silence. He shall carry in his hand a branch of a peach tree, and, if you think it well, a garland of the leaves of the same tree. They feign that he was born weak in the legs, and that, having been killed, his mother Isis restored him to life, and for this reason some make him stretched out on the ground, and others in the lap of his mother, with the feet joined together. But for the sake of harmony with the other figures, I would make him standing, supported in some way, or rather seated, like that of the most illustrious Cardinal Sant'Agnolo, which is likewise winged and holds a horn of plenty. He shall have about him persons offering to him, as was the custom, first fruits of lentils and other vegetables, and also of peaches, as mentioned above. Others used to make for this same god a figure without a face, with a little cap on the head, and about him a wolf's skin, all covered with eyes and ears, Take which of these two you please. In the last spandrel, between the facade at the head and that on the left, it will be well to place Angerona, the goddess of secrecy, which figure, coming within the same door of entrance, will admonish those who come out of the chamber to keep secret all that they have seen and heard, as is the duty of the servants of noblemen. The figure is that of a woman placed upon an altar, with the mouth bound and sealed. I know not with what vestments she used to be depicted, but I would envelop her in a long gown covering her whole person, and would represent her as shrugging her shoulders. Around her there must be painted some priests, by whom sacrifices used to be offered to her before the gate in the Curia, to the end that it might be unlawful for any person to reveal to the prejudice of the Republic any matter that might be discussed there. The space within the spandrels being filled up, it now only remains to say that around all this work it seems to me that there should be a frieze to encircle it on every side, and in this I would make either grotesques or small scenes with little figures. The matter of these I would have in harmony with the subjects already given above, each in accord with that nearest to it. And if you paint little scenes, it would please me to have them representing the actions that men and also animals do at the hour that we have fixed there. Now, beginning at the head, I would paint in the frieze of that facade as things appropriate to the dawn, artisans, workmen, and persons of various kinds, who, having risen, are returning to the labors of their pursuits, as smiths to the forge, men of letters to their studies, huntsmen to the open country, and muleteers to the road. And above all would I like to have the poor old woman from Petrarca rising from her spinning and lighting the fire, with her feet bare and her clothes disheveled. And if you think fit to make grotesques of animals there, make them of birds singing, geese going forth to their pasture, cocks announcing the day, and similar fancies. In the frieze on the facade at the foot, in accord with the darkness there, I would make persons going fowling by night, spies, adulterers, climbers of windows, and other such like things. And for grotesques, porcupines, hedgehogs, badgers, a peacock with the tail spread, signifying the night of stars, owls large and small, bats, and such like animals. In the frieze on the right-hand facade, you must paint things in keeping with the moon, such as fishers of the night, mariners navigating with the compass, necromancers, witches, and the like. For grotesques, a beacon tower in the distance, nets, weir baskets with some fishes in them, crabs feeding by the light of the moon, and, if there be space enough, an elephant kneeling in adoration of her. And finally, in the frieze on the left-hand facade, mathematicians with their instruments for measuring, thieves, false coiners, robbers of buried treasure, shepherds with their folds still closed, lying around their fires, and the like. And for animals I would make there wolves, foxes, apes, weasels, and any other treacherous animals that lie in wait for other creatures. In this part I have placed these fantasies thus at random in order to suggest what kinds of inventions could be painted there. But since they are not things that need to be described, I leave you to imagine them in your own manner, knowing that painters are by their nature full of resource and grace in inventing such bizarre fantasies. And now, having filled in all the parts of the work both within and without the chamber, there is no occasion for us to say any more, save that you must discuss the whole matter with the most illustrious Monsignori, and according to his taste, adding or taking away whatever may be necessary. You must strive on your part to do yourself honor. Fare you well. Now, although all these beautiful inventions of Caro's were very ingenious, fanciful, and worthy of praise, nevertheless Taddeo was not able to carry into execution more than the place would contain. But those that he painted there were the greater part, and they were executed by him with much grace and in a most beautiful manner. Next to this chamber, in the last of the three, which is dedicated to solitude, Taddeo, with the help of his assistants, painted Christ preaching to the apostles in the desert and in the woods, with a Saint John on the right hand, that is very well executed. In another scene, which is opposite to the first, are painted many figures of men who are living in the forest in order to avoid the conversation of mankind. And these certain others are seeking to disturb, throwing stones at them, while some are plucking out their own eyes so as not to see. And in this scene likewise is painted the Emperor Charles V, portrayed from life with this inscription: Post innumerus labores aciosem quietemque vitam traduxit. Opposite to Charles is the portrait of the last Grand Turk, who much delighted in solitude, with these words: Animum a negotio ad otium revocavit. Near him is Aristotle, who has beneath him these words: Anima fit sedendo et quiescendo prudentior. Opposite to him, beneath another figure by the hand of Taddeo, is written this: Quem ad modum negotiae, sic ad otiae ratio habenda. Beneath another may be read: Otium cum dignitate, negocium sine periculo. And opposite to that, under another figure, is this motto: Virtutis et libere vitae optima magistra solitudo. Beneath another: Plus agunt qui nihil agere videntur. And under the last: Qui agit plurima, plurimum peccat. To put it briefly, this room is very ornate with beautiful figures, and likewise very rich in stucco and gold. But to return to Vignola, how excellent he is in matters of architecture! The works that he has written and published, and still continues to write, in addition to his marvelous buildings, bear ample testimony, and in the life of Michelangelo we shall say all that it may be expedient for us to say in this connection. Taddeo, in addition to the works described above, executed many others of which there is no need to make mention, but in particular a chapel in the Church of the Goldsmiths in the Strada Giulia, a façade in chiaroscuro at San Geronimo, and the chapel of the High Altar in San Sabina. And his brother Federico is painting for the chapel of San Lorenzo, which is all wrought in stucco, in San Lorenzo in Damaso, an altar-piece with that saint on a gridiron and paradise all open, which altar-piece is expected to prove a very beautiful work. And, in order not to omit anything that may be useful, pleasing, or helpful to anyone who may read these my labors, I shall add this as well. While Taddeo was working, as has been related, at the Vigna of Pope Julius and at the façade of Mattiolo, the master of the post, he executed for Monsignor Innocenzio, the most reverend and illustrious Cardinal de Monte, 2 painted pictures of no great size, and one of them, which is beautiful enough, is now in the guardaroba of that cardinal, who has given the other away, in company with a vast number of things, ancient and modern, all truly of the rarest, among which I must not omit to mention, there is a painted picture as fantastic as any work of which we have spoken hitherto. In this picture, which is about 2 braccia and a half in height, there is nothing to be seen by him who looks at it from the ordinary point of view, from the front, save some letters on a flesh-colored ground, and in the center the moon, which goes gradually increasing or diminishing according to the lines of the writing. And yet, if you go below the picture and look in a sphere or mirror that is placed over the picture in the manner of a little baldachin, you see in that mirror, which receives the image from the picture, a most lifelike portrait in painting of King Henry II of France, somewhat larger than life, with these words about it, Henri II, Roi de France. You can see the same portrait by lowering the picture, placing your brow on the upper part of the frame and looking down. But it is true that whoever looks at it in that manner sees it turned the other way from what is in the mirror. That portrait, I say, cannot be seen save by looking at it as described above, because it is painted on 28 ridges, too low to be perceived, which are between the lines of the words given below, in which, besides the ordinary meaning, there may be read, by looking at both ends of the lines and in the center, certain letters somewhat larger than the others, which run thus: Henricus Valesius de Gratia, Gallorum Rex Invictissimus. It is true indeed that the Roman Messer Alessandro Taddei, the secretary of that cardinal, and Don Silvano Razzi, my dearest friend, who have given me information about this picture and about many other things, do not know by whose hand it is, but only that it was presented by the above-named King Henry to Cardinal Carafa when he was in France, and then by Carafa to the most illustrious Cardinal de Monte, who treasured it as a very rare thing, which in truth it is. The words painted in the picture, which alone are to be seen by him who looks at it from the ordinary point of view, as one looks at other pictures, are these. Line 1. Heos tu quid, vides nil ut, reor. Line 2. Nisi lunam, crescentem, ete. Line 3. Regione, positem quae, ex. Line 4. Intervallo gradatim, uti. Line 5. Crescit, nos admonet, ut in. Line 6. Una spe fide, et charitate, tive. Line 7. Simul et ego, illuminat, I. Line 8. Verbo de, crescamus, donic. Line 9. Ab ejustem, gratia fiat. Line 10. Lux in nobis, amplissima, qui. Line 11. Est eternus, ille dator, lucis. Line 12. In quo eta, quo mortalis omnes. Line 13. Verum lucem, recipere, si. Line 14. Speramus in, vanum non sperabimus. In the same guardaroba is a most beautiful portrait of Signora Sophonisba Angiusciola by her own hand, once presented by her to Pope Julius III. And there is another thing of great value, a very ancient book with the bucolics, the Georgics, and the Aeneid of Virgil, in characters so old that it has been judged by many men of learning in Rome and in other places that it was written in the very time of Caesar Augustus, or little after. Wherefore it is no marvel that it should be held by the cardinal in the greatest veneration. And let this be the end of the life of the painter Taddeo Zuccaro.